welcome to the Grim Drive podcast. My name is Jotham Busfield. I'm joined here by John Cuna. John and I are the co-hosts of Grim Drive, and this is episode 0, where we're trying to answer some key questions that listeners might have about, namely, what is the Grim Drive podcast? What is Grim Drive, which is something we're going to answer towards the end of this episode 0, and why we're doing it, as well as why the listeners should tune in, what they stand to gain from it. So in terms of what the Grim Drive podcast is, mainly we're trying to look at mental health through the lens of sports and athletes, mostly professional athletes. Most of our episodes are going to have a focus on one athlete and one mental health issue. For instance, our first episode 1, is likely going to focus on Kevin Love and anxiety. So that's going to be the main format, is one athlete, one mental health issue. And so we're using sports and athletes to shine a light on mental health. John, I'd like to kick it to you a little bit for the why, in terms of why are we doing this podcast? What's the point?
Yeah, I think the reason we're doing this is because now more than ever, the stigma around mental health and males and professional athletes is greatly diminished. And every single day we're seeing more and more guys and athletes coming out and talking about the importance of mental health and why it's important for just their game, but just for their person in general. And I think we wanted to provide an outlet for a broad base of people to come in and learn a little bit about what they're doing, why it's important for them to be paying attention to these types of things, and to just have a unified place for people to come and learn about why this is important and why it's not a nice to have anymore, but it's a must have in terms of supporting your mental health.
Yeah, the stigma has definitely been reduced enough to not consider it gone, but consider it moved out of the way, where I think there's a clear path to us, understanding mental health, and especially male mental health. I think it's finally gotten to a point where, especially key athletes like Kevin Love and other key, male athletes are finally coming forward and using their platforms to discuss mental health and be able to shine a light on some important topics. And it's not just male athletes that we're going to be focusing on, but, our work professionally, which we're going to get to in a second, does focus on young guys mainly. But the athletes that we're going to shine a light on are kind of all across the age, gender, and racial kind of spectrum of things. So one other reason why I think it's important for us to be doing this is that mental health is a difficult topic for many to understand. It's hard. I think a lot of people are struggling in different ways, especially in 2020. I think it's never been more so the case based on what everyone's kind of gone through this year. And mental health learning is a lot easier if two things are present. One, if the use of metaphor. It's being able to put difficult, jargony mental health topics into terms people can understand. It makes it a lot easier to try to learn about these topics if they're put into terms that we can all get behind. Athletes and pro sports is a great lens to use that approach. And then case studies, right? If we look at specific athletes and what they have gone through, what mental health topic that they have struggled with and how they got through it, it makes the path for someone else listening to find it easier to kind of get help themselves. So why do you think listeners should tune in? What do they stand to gain?
Well, I would say one thing too, just to add to what you were saying, is that one thing that I think is really important, that the reason why the stigma has come down is I think that we're focusing more on the concept of mental health, not mental illness necessarily. Mm-hmm. And I think that supporting your mental health can be different than supporting mental illness. We're going to be discussing both in here. But I think that that's a big distinction that's going on right now that is important for people to understand. So I think coming to the conversation of mental health is a little bit more of a welcoming place, especially for guys who have a little bit more of that apprehension to come and talk to those things. So, the reason why this is going to be a good place for us to come and talk to is it's going to be a welcoming place. It's not going to be a judgmental place for people to come to or feel like they're doing something wrong. It's going to be information-based, using people in the professional realm who are doing this work already, and talking about it openly and using their experiences to try to help others who might be struggling with something similar see an example of someone who they probably look up to on the football field, soccer field, ice rink, and say, oh, wow, if they're doing that, maybe it's okay for me to do it as well. And to come to this place to learn about what they're going through, how they're supporting it, and to maybe feel that they can do it for themselves as well.
Absolutely. And I think you make a good point that mental illness and mental health are not always the same thing. And I also think that, athletes talking about mental health and talking about their journey to have good mental health, I think sort of points to the fact that we're maybe with the stigma reducing there's an open door to prevention, right? I think prevention can be a tough sell, especially in the United States, but it's important. We don't have to wait till there's something wrong to sort of go and feel like we have to get fixed. I mean, a lot of these things can be prevented with some pretty key strategies regarding different mental health issues, and we're going to get into that. And part of the purpose of this podcast is to shine some light on how to be, how to have good mental health and how to approach different situations, whether it's anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues. What can listeners do to be in a good place? So another reason why I think people should maybe give this podcast a chance and listen in is that we're licensed clinicians. We have 20 plus years of experience together. We also happen to be huge sports fans, Boston sports fans. Please don't hold that against us if you're not from the Boston area. And our style, just like when we work with clients where we overlap coaching and therapy, our style is transparent and straightforward. You're not going to get a bunch of jargon from us. We just kind of tell it like it is, because I think we've learned that our clients respect that, and they get more out of the process when they know where they stand with things, and we're just upfront about everything. So one other reason why listeners might give this podcast a chance is that they might find these athlete mental health experiences interesting, right? It's easier to learn about mental health through the lens of someone else and what they've dealt with than it is sometimes to focus strictly on ourselves, right? Now, eventually, people have to shine a light on themselves and really confront the things that they're going through. But initially, it can be helpful to see, okay, what did this athlete go through? What were they struggling with? What was their path to getting better? How did they go about that? Because that can make it easier for listeners, I think. And then learning about their experiences, these athletes' experiences, could help a listener directly in some kind of way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one other thing that we'll talk more about as we go through. You talked about prevention and it being not having to wait for something to happen. We're also going to talk a lot about recovery as a key point of what athletes need. And when I say recovery, I mainly mean from injury. So almost every single athlete can identify a time where in their sports career they were injured and had to come back and do sort of like PT, right? They tear a hamstring, they've got to do physical therapy to kind of come back, and they often don't take care of the repair to the mind. And so when they come back to the game, there's hesitation, there's doubt, there's fear, and that dictates how well they can play. And a lot of what we're hoping to be able to do within this podcast is to be able to shine a light on what you should be doing alongside your physical therapy and coming in and doing this work to make sure that when you get back to play, you're ready to rock and roll and you're not confronted with fear or, am I going to get injured again? Or am I going to be 100%? Or am I going to be able to do the same things I was able to do before the injury? Sort of addressing those thoughts and barriers and hindrances while you're going through treatment getting better versus when you step back on for game one after injury, that you're fully prepared to be executing it the way that you want to be doing. So I think that that's definitely another part of the purpose of what we're hoping to be able to do, because there's definitely some athletes, which is great, that we're seeing that are doing that work. Hayward is one example of someone who's done some of that work, but it's not as common of a practice for people. They just sort of go to PT, they get better, and then they go back, and there's not much attention or light shown on the fact that there's probably a lot of barriers in their own mind that are maybe holding them back to being able to perform the way that they used to. Even though if their body is perfectly fine and ready to go, the brain and mind really affects their ability to play, and we want to shine light on ways that you can support yourself using both our ideas of what we've come up with and just our own practice, but also using the examples of professional athletes who are doing that work as well.
Yeah, I think you make some good points. I mean, I think sometimes we talk in terms of mental fitness more than just mental health. So I think mental fitness includes mental health, but it also includes performance mindset when it comes to being on the field or being on the court or being on the rink. And it also includes recovery mindset and how you're going to get through that, because I think athletes, when they're dealing with injuries, it's a whole different mental ballgame when it comes to being able to recover from that and get back to either the same form or better than they were before that happened. So sometimes we're going to talk about athlete experiences with regard to general mental health, and there's always a slight overlap with their profession as an athlete. And then we're going to get into some other specifics, like you said, around maybe some specifics that more apply to in-game mindset and also recovery mindset when it comes to injuries. So maybe we can pivot now a little bit to talk about what is Grim Drive. I think there's a lot of people that probably see the title of the podcast and they're wondering what that even means. So maybe, John, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Grim Drive is again, we sort of a mentality that we have. A funny story of sort of where it was birthed. Jotham and I were interviewing for a position at our company, and one of the candidates used, when talking about work-life balance, was talking about, not wanting to be grimly driven, or be working too hard within the profession to build the practice.
Yeah, workaholism.
Basically. Workaholism, yeah. Right? And that's definitely something that we hear, that Grim Drive is synonymous with workaholism, and we'll address that because we do not see it the same. We really see it as a combination of sort of grit, determination, ambition, and the willingness to sort of, the Grim Drive itself actually is a motivator for us to continue to work hard in what we want to be doing. We don't see our company as a traditional place. We really see it as something that's going to be innovative in the field. And Grim Drive is sort of the mentality that we possess, sort of moving forward. And sort of, I think for me personally, growing up, full transparency, I've got ADHD, and so public school systems weren't really that easy for me, and sort of had to learn to adapt on the fly and really figure out a way for myself to, how do I survive in an environment like this that doesn't really support what I need to be doing. And a lot of those types of qualities sort of help to build my Grim Drive of sort of, what do I want for myself? How am I going to get there? Really process focused. And that really helped me. And that's sort of where Grim Drive maybe was born for me.
Yeah, I think you described it well. I mean, I think for me, Grim Drive is sort of the relentless pursuit of purpose-driven goals, and we talk a lot about purpose, in our work with clients, and I think that's what Grim Drive is. It's a relentless pursuit of goals, as long as those goals are tied to a key purpose that we think is worthwhile for us in our lives. It's getting through adversity, it's breaking down barriers, and I think athletes embody this concept on a consistent basis in many different ways, which is another reason why we think this topic of using athletes as a window into mental health and mental fitness is really the right approach for us. And let's be honest. I mean, it's 2020. I think pushing through 2020 for most people has involved a little bit of Grim Drive to be able to get through it, based on what everyone has gone through together collectively. And so that the title is about relentless determination, with a little bit of humor baked into it, because let's face it, achieving goals is not always glamorous. It's not always pretty. You have to be able to get through failure. You have to be able to break through barriers. It's not just a clear path paved in front of you. You got to be able to create that yourself. And I think it takes Grim Drive to do that for sure. So we hope people listening in to this episode 0 will give the podcast a chance. We have episodes 1 and 2 dropping next week, so we're hoping you will join us and subscribe. And until further notice.
Thanks for joining us, guys.